all news now. Today is the news covering October 17th, so ending in October 17th. Now, I just want to start by saying a lot happened this last week, and so I'm going to try to hit the highlights, and hopefully you guys, I don't miss anything you guys were really interested in, because there was a lot, and I'm going to try to keep this to about 45 minutes. That's my longest show, and I have had to pare it down and just throw stuff out that I'm not going to talk about. All right, let's talk about security. Have you ever thought about using the law to stop a cyber threat? Well, that's actually what Microsoft has done this last week. Well, it started before last week, but was executed this last week on the Trickbot botnet. The Trickbot botnet started way back in 2016 as a banking Trojan and has kind of morphed into this mass solution. So malware as a service. And yes, we are in that day and age where mass is a thing, and masses are pains in the... Yes, you get the idea. You can finish that sentence. I keep my streams to PG. All right, so the Trickbot botnet has actually been a huge pain in everyone's derriere since 2016 and has become this huge botnet. And Microsoft this last week actually took control of some or a lot of the Trickbot control servers. Now, this didn't stop it, but Microsoft, in conjunction with the United States Military Cyber Command, that they launched an attack on it the week prior that caused some confusion to the botnet, as well as helped protect some of the already infected people. It has been, and hopefully does, slow the botnet down. And so that was, it's not the solution, but hopefully this will help alleviate the pain from the botnet. Anyways, there's some cool articles written up on this. If you're interested in that type of thing, you should check them out. It seems like the cyber warriors in NATO's Eastern Edge are giving a lot of warnings about the growing number of work from home people and the increase to vulnerability to cyber attack that this brings. And to be quite honest, I agree with them. And this is why I take security so importantly. And this week, we actually had a lot of tools released about security for remote workers. So this is perfect. And yeah, and this is why I always say you should always be putting layers of security in place, whether it's the devices you run on your network, the devices that run your network, or the way you connect to your business's code and infrastructure. So Google and Intel have both warned of a potential IoT security flaw in Bluetooth in Linux. So if you have a fleet of IoT devices that run Linux and use Bluetooth or have it enabled, then you might want to check it out and see if you're affected and what you can do to mitigate the risks. All right, let's have a quick rant about open source licensing. And really, honestly, why we do open source. I get very touchy about open source licensing and why people do open source. So I do open source. I do these videos that share my knowledge and stuff to A, build a community, and B, to share my knowledge and help other people achieve something fantastic. And that's my goal with it. That isn't really a business model. It has not made me rich, and I don't think anybody should ever take that as a business model. Now, I think that it's great that some people can make their business model sharing their experience and their goals. And I'm sorry, my wife got these 2 cats and they have to be locked down here and they are being a pain. But no, this is my coffee. You're not allowed to have coffee. So let's talk about open source licensing. And what spurred this conversation here was Pivotal's move to a new Agpl license. Now, the GPL has been around for a while, but it's really the Agpl that has been kind of taking on. And basically what the Agpl does is extends the GPL license to cloud providers, meaning that cloud providers must make their source code available. And in general, this deeply integrates to all of their things, which means they just can't use it because it means that AWS would have to open source the entire AWS platform, which doesn't really make sense. So basically, the Agpl isn't, in my point of view, a open source license with the intended purpose. The Agpl is to say, hey, get off my turf. And so I just want to make it a point. In this, I'm going to be talking about Pivotal because Pivotal's the one, but Pivotal isn't the first to adopt the Agpl. I'm looking at you, DynamoDB, and it's probably not going to be the last. But I'd love to have this conversation with a company or a startup that's thinking about open sourcing their product and talk about why you open source your product. It's not a business model. Stop trying to make the MIT Apache open source a business model. It's not. And I'm saying this coming from, I work for an open source company and I write open source code and I make a living doing it. But it's not our business model. Our business model isn't selling open source code. That's a terrible, horrible thing to do. Why would anybody buy free software? Think about that. So what spurred this on is Pivotal is changing their permissive licensing to the Agpl. Now, sometimes the GPL people would say that people need to contribute back to the open source. And you know what? A lot of times, if you look at Amazon, AWS, Microsoft Azure's, Google's GCP, guess what? These companies actually do contribute a lot to open source. Amazon contributes some to open source as well as contributes its own open source projects. I'm not saying that they're the best at it. Not here to defend them because they're not the best at it, but they do contribute to these communities and you can find their engineers doing these things and they release their own open source projects. Not a ton, but they do. Microsoft and Google, on the other hand, are huge into these communities, release a lot of their own open source projects, and contribute a lot to other open source projects. So I don't think that this actually makes a good argument. Not anymore. Maybe 20 years ago, I could see this when open source wasn't as accepted and companies didn't commit teams to supporting open source projects that they use. But in today's era, I don't think that this holds any water anymore. And to say that these companies aren't, all the Agpl that I've ever seen is an anti-compete. Basically an anti-compete license against the cloud providers. And honestly, that just means that you made a bad business choice on how you're going to sell your code. You want to sell your code as a service. And because of that, your business model, you can't have these other people compete because they might actually do it better. And this is my whole problem. And the reason I want to have this conversation, because I want it to get out there. Open source isn't a business model. Your business model needs to be something else. Plausible even stated one of their issues was companies wanted their help supporting Plausible so they can sell Plausible self-hosted. Well, why didn't Plausible sell these companies support? I mean, that's what open source companies that are successful and have been successful do, is they sell support. That is one thing that you can sell. Now, let's be clear. I want to, again, I'm not hating on Plausible. Other companies have done it before them. Other companies will do it after them. That's not my goal here. My goal is to just bring up a conversation that we need to have out there with these companies. I'm fine with companies not doing open source. You know what? That's acceptable to me. If you don't want to be open source, if you want to sell your code, that's fine. You know what? I love AWS, Azure. I love DigitalOcean, but not all of DigitalOcean's code is open source. And I get that. I understand that. If I could spin up my own DigitalOcean, easy peasy, I'd still need their support, honestly. These cats are so distracting. All right. So again, I just think that people need to see open source isn't a business model. And I'm sorry if all of you, I'm probably opening a huge can of worms because there's probably a lot of people on different sides of this. I love open source. It's not a business model. All right. I can't stop thinking about, but like, think about if Google only released Kubernetes under the Agpl. So Kubernetes wouldn't have been able to run on Azure, DigitalOcean, anywhere else. Kubernetes could only run on GCP. And I mean, I guess you could compile it yourself and deploy it yourself with no support from a company, really. And then you could do it. So, I mean, there might be people like Red Hat or SUSE might be able to provide support for that. But in general, none of these other cloud providers are. So that would have made Kubernetes not platform agnostic because you couldn't really have support in it in these other clouds. So you couldn't have a multi-cloud strategy. Kubernetes wouldn't be the project it is today. Kubernetes would have been neutered. And honestly, I don't know the things, but if you want to look at, some of these projects, I just doubt that they will ever have the community that they did before they went to the Agpl. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people love them just as much after they moved. But stop putting your butt in their face. Lay down. Lay down. That's right. I know, I took your blanket away. You're fine. All right. So anyways, that's just something to think about. And yes, I think Google is actually hurt that they didn't release it under the Agpl, but I think it would have been a bad move for them. Thanks to Microsoft and the OIN, or the Open Invention Network, we now have protection for the exFAT file system, and this is actually a big deal. So basically, you can support exFAT without worry of patent violation. Microsoft joined the OIN back in 2018 and then extended its support in 2019. And what's really awesome is that the OIN now expanded their support to things like the Android open source project and version 10 and Robot OS, Hyperledger, Hadoop, and exFAT. So it extended all of their protection to all of those projects. So anything inside of those is protected under the OIN. And this is really good for some of those patent trolls out there and protecting you from that. So anyways, very cool. If you don't know what the OIN is, you should go check them out. Give them a shout out on Twitter. It's a fantastic organization. And yeah, it's pretty awesome. So Hashicorp, the creators of projects like Terraform and Nomad and Vault, have released, in the accords of the gods of everyone released the same type of product in the same week, the Project Boundary. While I haven't gotten to use it yet, it boasts support for all of the Hashicorp's utilities like Vault, so it has a nice Vault integration. But what does it do? Its goal is to provide simple and secure access to hosts and services. It looks to replace things like SSH Bastion hosts and VPNs, and claims to be better and easier to manage users. So basically, the whole goal of this is to, VPNs and SSH can be very difficult to manage users and whatnot, and it looks to bring that under one thing to make it a lot easier for remote workers. Not only this, it looks like it's pretty easy to run Boundary. I was looking into it and it really just looks like you need an SQL database and a KMS store, which are both easy to provide on-premise or in any cloud. So it's actually quite easy to deploy, and looks like I didn't find a Kubernetes deployment. I'm sure that there's a Nomad deployment, but I'm sure that it would be pretty easy to write a Helm chart for Kubernetes. So continuing on with Hashicorp, they also released something called Waypoint, and this is a new open source project that provides or looks to provide developers with a consistent workflow to build, deploy, and release applications across what they say is any platform. Now, this is done, and they want their goal is to enable developers to get their applications from development to production in a single file and deploy with a single command, Waypoint up. Now, again, I haven't gotten to use this yet, but they state that out of the box, it supports Kubernetes, Nomad, ECS, Google Cloud Run, Azure Container Instances, Docker, build packs, and more. So, and they say that it is built off of a plugin system and is easy to extend what things it supports. So if this is something that, and really in the cloud native, what a lot of people are putting a lot of effort into right now is the ability to support development. We got Kubernetes kind of figured out. The next real thing is this DevOps world where I know Kubernetes is all about DevOps, but honestly, Kubernetes doesn't solve any DevOps, honestly. It actually makes a nightmare for DevOps because you have developers that don't really know Kubernetes, and then there's a whole thing. So there's a lot of projects that are putting a lot of work into supporting DevOps better. And that's basically what this is trying to do. Make it easier for developers to get their code running. You want to get up here, kitten? I'll put your blanket back up here in a second. All right, so that is what Hashicorp released. I'm probably going to look into those. Maybe we'll do some videos on them, but they looked pretty cool. Hashicorp is actually a pretty good engineering. Everything I've seen out of their engineering team looks pretty solid. It is all written in Go, which means that they've missed out on the superior language, but they can't be perfect. Okay, so it seems like the Linux 5.9 kernel got the thumbs up. And so it means that in early 2021, you're going to see distributions like SUSE and Ubuntu and Red Hat start rolling out their distributions with support of that kernel. Now, if that is not soon enough for you and you need the latest kernel, you can go compile it today by yourself. It's actually not that hard to compile the kernel. It's a little bit harder than you might want, but it's not too bad. And some of the biggest things that I've seen in the Linux kernel with the 5.9 release is some better support for SSD and flash storage. It's going to give you kind of a small speed boost. I really see that this is probably a bigger release for data centers than it is for your home user. GitHub, that place, the largest repository for open source code, that GitHub. I think it's the largest repository for open source. Open sourced its documentation, which is kind of weird because its documentation could be seen anyways, but it's now officially open source. But they have a Node.js server that serves the documentation, and they released all of that. So not only the documentation, but all of the server that serves it. So I think that this does two really cool things. First, I'm kind of surprised that they didn't do this in the first place. Because now if there's a bug with documentation, you can submit a pull request to it. So if you could do it better, if you find a bug with it, you can submit a pull request. If you want to write an article, you could submit a pull request. This just makes so much sense for everyone's documentation. Everyone's documentation should be open source, at least source available, so you can make a pull request to it. I think that actually makes so much sense. I don't know why more companies don't do it. You find a problem with it, you find a workaround, you open a pull request. they get free documentation. Anyways, go open source your documentation right now. Do it. Just do it. So anyways, they open sourced it. Now, sadly, it's a Node.js, and we don't really need more Node.js applications out there. I'm pretty sure that we don't. Nobody wants that. But it's a Node.js server, and it's out there. And yeah, go out there, fix some GitHub documentation. Plasma KDE 2.20 is here. Now, I personally use i3 and GNOME. Why I use both is a long story. If you want to know, I can make a video on it. But anyways, if you are a user of KDE, it's worth checking out. I scrolled through a lot of their things. They made it a little bit prettier. They added a lot of Wayland support. So if you are using Wayland, it actually looks usable from a Wayland perspective, as well as they fixed support for screen capturing and recording. So if that kept you from using Plasma KDE, that has support for it now. So you could go ahead and use it. Again, I don't use it, but yeah, if you do, you should check it out. I don't cover much on OpenStack, but they did do a new release just before their 10-year-old birthday. So there you go. OpenStack turned 10. And there's a new release. All right, let's move on to Kubernetes. I know we're only to Kubernetes and we're like 20 minutes in. So I'm going to keep moving. Sorry if this is at a fast pace, but I will try to cover as much as I can as clearly as possible. All right, so this week, I know that adopting Kubernetes is hard, and I've never claimed otherwise. It is. But it seems to be a particular struggle for some companies. And there was a slew of articles that came out this last week that I read about companies struggling to adopt Kubernetes. And you know what? I think that these companies struggle because they don't quite realize what they're getting into. I think that before any company adopts Kubernetes, you need to know what you're getting into, and more importantly, why you're getting into it. You need to know what problems it solves and what problems it creates. And you need to know that the problems it solves is bigger than the problems it creates. If somebody tells you that Kubernetes doesn't create any of its own problems, they're lying to you. Yes, they're lying to you. That's why projects like all these projects supporting Kubernetes exist, because it has problems and they try to solve it. So you need to know what it is. All right, so my favorite piece of news in Kubernetes this week, just because I don't know whether I love it or hate it. Actually, I'm pretty sure I hate it. So there you go. Now, I am not a hater on nginx. It's a great reverse proxy. It's easy to use like that and whatnot. But ever after F5 bought nginx, it seems to have lost its roots a little bit. Now, before we get into this, have you asked yourself, I wish there was another service mesh. I don't have enough mesh for my services. That's legitimate concern. Do you have enough mesh? I don't have enough mesh. So Istio, Linkerd, Console, and Mesh just aren't enough for me. And because of that, nginx released their own mesh. It's called NSM because nginx works to make the hardest to say and pronounce things and to read. So NSM is the nginx service mesh. It's great, except that it's not open source. There is no source for me to see, so I can't really comment on it. And while they say it's free to download and say that several times, you need an F5 login to download it. So not only could I not test it for you, there is no code for me to look over. They basically also said their selling point was, we're better than the rest. So I have no idea if it is, but there is now a new service mesh out there by nginx. They're really the only thing that I saw different in their little bit of news clippings that were there. The only thing that they really stated that they did differently was the fact that it doesn't use Envoy as the data plane. So if you don't know what Envoy is, lots of things use Envoy because, well, one, it's tried and tested and has survived massive scale. So Envoy has been used, I think it was created by Lyft off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure it was created by Lyft in conjunction with somebody else and has been used in a lot of places. Things like Cilium can partner with Envoy to do a lot of really cool things. It's tried, it's tested, it's a really well-written project. And that was their main thing. It's written on the nginx Plus, so their subscription. So not only, even if you can get it for free, you have to have an nginx Plus subscription. So nginx, if you're watching, I will test it if you send me a license for all of that, just to see how it is. But at the same time, I'm not that excited. I think they went around it a little bit the wrong way. All right. The CNCF has graduated Rook. So Rook is now joining projects like FluentD, Containerd, Core DNS, and Kubernetes itself. These are some of the not that many graduated projects, and Rook has joined them. Graduation basically means that it has met a certain level of quality, a certain level of stableness, a certain size of a community and has passed a security check. So I think last December, like 8 or 9 months ago, Rook went through a security audit, and there was a few other things that they went through, and it has finally graduated. I don't think that this is a big deal and really shouldn't have affected your reliance on Rook. A lot of people use stuff before it gets graduated. Helm has graduated, but a lot of people used Helm before Helm graduated. So I don't think that this is that big of a deal, but it is really cool that the Rook community got it through. So good job to them. Anybody that works on Rook, excellent work. It's really cool to see you guys bringing storage to Kubernetes. And so that is exciting just for that community. It doesn't mean anything as to you from the consumer standpoint, but from the community, they got through a lot of hurdles to get there. And that's really awesome to see that they got there. All right, so that is pretty much it for the open source news. There was some other things in open source, but in the time of brevity, those were the things I wanted to cover. And I you know what? I know that I put nginx in there. Nginx is open source, like the core, but their service mesh definitely isn't open source. I looked, they have a GitHub for issues. That's it. There's a GitHub. It's horrible, nginx. I expect better from you. I expect better from you, F5. All right. So I guess another piece of open source, but it's in the machine learning. Earlier this week, SUSE, not sponsored. Nobody asked me to say this, just so you know, released their K3 AI, which is basically just a set of scripts that helps you deploy a Kubeflow cluster locally, leveraging Rancher's K3 OS, their K3S OS platform. So if you're looking for yet another local deployment of Kubeflow, this looks like it does it pretty simply. I haven't actually gotten a chance myself to test this and play around with it a whole lot, but I actually plan to, and I will probably release a video on it later, just showing you how to do it and what it is. It looks like it does a lot of nice things very quickly and easily to let you deploy it and to tear it down if you don't want it anymore. All right, so that was pretty much it for machine learning. We're going to move on to some cloud news. Surprisingly, the majority of the cloud news isn't in the major 3 players. So Azure pretty much had nothing other than expanding support for things in different regions. I don't really cover that because every cloud provider does it every single week to different availability zones and whatnot. And so that's pretty much their biggest thing that they did this last week. AWS made a feature I thought was so dumb that it wasn't in the first release that I thought it was worth bringing up. AWS Aurora enabled dynamic resizing for database storage space. Now, when I first read this, I thought, oh, cool. Your database will get larger when it needs to. Well, that's true, but that's always been supported. Oh. So what is dynamic resizing for databases if it will grow when you need it? Basically, the only thing that didn't exist was if you deleted data, it wouldn't decrease what it charged you. So finally, in 2020, they have finally added dynamic resizing. So if you delete data from your database, you stop getting charged for space. I found that quite exciting. I was tickled. I I thought it was quite funny. I was like, really? That wasn't in the original service? I understand if it was in tech preview or alpha or something, but like, this is a release thing that they've supported for a while. All right. It's out there. So if you're in AWS, whatever. Okay. So I know we haven't gotten to Cloudflare, but I will talk about GCP. And it's almost like GCP was in response to Cloudflare's slew of releases. They seem to strike back with their BeyondCorp alliance. And they seem to add some of the same partners that Cloudflare did. And that's kind of cool. So if you use GCP or you use Cloudflare, both of those support a lot of the same providers. And basically, BeyondCorp is extending that zero trust out to your users' devices and in a whole trying to support remote workers. Now, my big problem with things like GCP and Cloudflare is they themselves don't have remote workers. They don't support. Google has spoken out against remote working, and Cloudflare, to my knowledge, hasn't spoken out against it, but I don't think they have remote workers. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is slightly hypocritical to me if you're going to say that you're going to support other people working from home and remote work, but not really do it themselves. Now, I realize during the pandemic, Google has let people work from home, but their goal is to bring them back into the office. It's not that they want to continue doing that. So we'll see, but that would be my one complaint against this is really practice what you're selling people, because you're going to make a better product doing it. You're going to find the failures and you're going to fix them. So it's called dog fooding. I'm a huge fan of dog fooding. Google, you need to dog food your remote working technologies. That's the way you're going to get them better. All right, let's move on to Cloudflare. Do you want a NAS? Not a NAS. NAS has one A. You want a NAS. That's right. That's what Cloudflare has now provided. An NAAS. NAS. With the advent of mobile, work from home, SaaS, cloud providers, and all right. So with the advent of that and with the growing work for zero trust networking, the old model of networking has become strained and burdened and hard to support. And this is where Cloudflare plans to step in and fill the gap with Cloudflare One. And this is a comprehensive cloud-based network as a service designed to give you a secure, fast, reliable corporate network in the cloud. This has everything with the magic firewall that they released, all the way down to WAN technologies and cloud-based security and performance, and down to your devices. And one of the things I really liked about their device support was the fact that they didn't write their own thing. with their device and login support and user management support, they went the route of partnering. So you don't have to migrate your identity management. They're partnering with Okta, GitHub, Microsoft Active Directory, and as well as others. All the cloud providers are supported. And this carries on to the device integrity. They went with Carbon Black, CloudStrike, SentinelOne, and Tanium. This not only allows you to pick one, but it allows you to use several. And that's really great. And this Cloudflare One is wrapping everything together to build your secure network as one single service. It's actually kind of quite cool because it takes everything from the device all the way to your corporate network and allows you to do it. They even have a project to allow you to run your browser in Cloudflare. That actually seems weird. I don't even understand how that would work because, like, do you open a browser on your computer that has like a VPN to the browser? And I don't get that. I need to dig into it more, I guess. I didn't have the time. That seemed weird, but they said you could do it. Following up on that, so Cloudflare released Cloudflare One. Google expanded their support for BeyondCorp. Palo Alto seemed to decide it needed to step up to the plate and release Prisma Cloud 2.0, calling themselves the only comprehensive cloud native security platform. So if you're running Kubernetes and are worried about visibility, governance, compliance, containers, and serverless, as well as host security, along with some DevSecOps and other things like this, the shift left paradigm. I don't like the terminology shift left because it makes it sound like you take it and move it over to here. And really, you took it and expanded it to here. You didn't move it over here because shift would make me think that you just shifted everything to the left. You shouldn't shift everything to the left because it's layers of security. So whoever came up with shift left, bad marketing. You expand left. And I don't even know what left means. Like, why is it left? It's just expand. I don't get the whole shift left. Weird. I don't know why you would use it. And yeah, anyways. So it's the zero trust paradigm, not shift left. Yeah, shift left is stupid. Anyways, sorry. If you want to do that and you're looking for a cloud native solution, so for your Kubernetes cluster, it's definitely worth checking out. I wish that did more open source, honestly. I know here we're a big around open source. I bring these things up even though they're not open source just because I think they're worth knowing about. Especially as a large corporation, you need to be watching these things and keeping an eye open for them. If you guys don't care about anything that's not open source, let me know and I'll not cover any of it. All right, so today in the technology section, we're going to talk about Mark Lipscomb. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. I probably should have Googled it. But I always like to leave names as this enigma on my channel. Did I pronounce them correctly? Did I just butcher them? It's kind of fun. So he is Adobe's vice president of global talent. And the only reason I'm bringing him up is he said he released some comments about how he puts a premium on humility when hiring talent. And I thought this was fantastic. I didn't think C-suite cared. And I am ecstatic to see C-suite start to understand the importance of humility. And Mark Lipscomb, if you'd like to talk to me to A, correct how I pronounce your name, and B, to be hosted on this channel to have a conversation about some of the things that you do to support this, I have a lot of questions. Because honestly, humble employees it's going to be hard for them to get the promotions over the less humble because they don't have a tendency not to talk and boast about themselves. And so I want to know how he supports this in the corporation itself, because not just when it doesn't stop when you hire, but you also want these humble people getting more senior positions and taking leadership roles. And so how does he support that in the company? I think it's a very interesting topic, and I would love to hear more on him about that. But anyways, I've always said that it's very important to stay humble because you learn the most when you're humble. If you think you know everything, you've stopped learning. If you think you're better than everyone in the room, then you're not going to learn from anybody in that room anymore. So it's always important to stay humble. And I think that this is fantastic. Please, Mark, reach out to me. You don't watch my show, I know. Anyways. All right. Anyways, let's move on to Pine 64. I love Pine 64. I always have. I know. I'm super biased. I just really like Pine 64. I actually was part of their first Kickstarter for their first board. I have it. It runs my DNS. It's fantastic. Love Pine 64. But they released their all-winner Cortex A7 IP camera, which is actually pretty cool. It's complete with a micro SD card, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, 32 GPIO header pins, and PoE. I really wish the Raspberry Pi 4 had PoE. I wish that these boards just came out with PoE because these devices make sense for PoE. Can you imagine making a Raspberry Pi cluster with PoE? It would be one less cable. It would mean you don't have to buy another $12 power supply. It would make the board so much cheaper. If you added $5 to the board, it's still cheaper for me than buying a power supply. So please, you single board makers, put PoE on it. Anyways, back to the real thing. This is a Pine 64 based IP camera. It comes with PoE, so you could run it as, it doesn't come with an enclosure. So if you want it to be outside, you need to make like a waterproof enclosure for it. But it even comes with infrared LEDs for night vision and supports M12 lenses. So you can add some different lenses on it for whatever you want to capture. And yeah, it could power your next camera project, and seems pretty cool. Honestly, yeah. So if you're looking to make a, IP camera system, this would be a cool one to kind of, build it out with. If you guys would like to see an IR camera project done here, let me know. I'd like an excuse to buy some of these. All right, so under the project shoutouts, I have two projects that I want to shout out. The first is a project called the Headless Recorder by a person called Nolet. Now, the reason I'm calling this out is Amazon AWS released their CloudWatch synthetic recorder, which was based off of the Headless Recorder and was a fork of it. And AWS actually did a really bad job of giving Nolet and the team credit for it. And so I wanted to make sure they got the credit that they were due. You guys did a great job. AWS screwed up. Now, AWS, I have seen try to do a pretty good job on this, so I don't know that they did it on purpose. And I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. I've seen some people call them out, so I'm waiting to see their response on it. Hopefully it's a good response. If it's a bad response, I will report back next week that it was a bad response. But generally they do pretty well. It was just this one. I saw it get called out, and I wanted to make sure that they were doing. The Headless Recorder is a cool project. You should go and check it out. It's so cool that Amazon wanted a piece of it. The next one is the BPY top tool. This, if you're looking for a resource monitor on Linux and top isn't cutting it for you, top is quite rough, quite 90s-ish. And HTOP just doesn't have all the clicky buttons. BPY top actually looks really cool. Not only does it support clicky buttons, so you don't have to use the keyboard, although it has full keyboard support. It lays things out in a really cool way and allows you to monitor your system really nicely. So if you're looking for a very pretty, very easy to use, as well as very informative, it laid out more information, easier to see than I have seen in anything just getting to know it. You should check it out. It's a cool open source project. All right. So that is it for me today. I am sorry that this was a little bit more rushed. There was a lot going on, and I'm sorry if I missed some of the things that you were interested in. I will try to make next week a much more calm, released and rehearsed presentation. I apologize for the inconvenience these two brothers brought to the stage with them. They're very loving and sweet cats, but they are a bit annoying to film a video with. All right, that's it for me today. I hope that you enjoyed this. Please like and subscribe to this, and please leave me a comment below. And if you really did like it and want to join the community, want to let me know of projects that deserve shout outs and whatnot, join the Discord community, let me know, and stick around. If you didn't like this show, I'm going to need you to hit that subscribe button, stick around, and see if these videos get any better for science. I hope that you all have a fantastic next week, and I'll see you next weekend.